name is Doug, turning an ugly glue bomb into something cool and unusual. In episode 9, our final reveal. In today's episode, we finish two of Jim Hall's beautiful masterpieces, the Chaparral 2. To know where we're going, we gotta review where we've been. First of all, we had two ugly glue bombs that a lot of people would have just tossed away. Well, we have totally refurbished them, and today we finish. First on the list is brass roll bar construction. Remember now, these Cox slot cars were rather inexpensive during the day. Even though these slot cars are expensive today, they started out as toys, and we played with our toys. And many of the outside details were broken, such as the roll bars. Now, on the Chaparral 2C that we're creating, the roll bar is totally different than what was there when the kit was released. For a brief time during 1965, the Chaparral team experimented with these little U-shaped roll bars that protected just the driver. Later on, they returned to the full width of the body for the roll bar. The two cars we've been restoring are the Chaparral 2A and the Chaparral 2C. So we'll have two different brass roll bars. And as we see, most of the time today, we're going to be taking a look at the development of the 2C. We did a 2A in a previous series, and we've just improved some of those techniques. And I think these two cars will be even better than those. But I'll leave a link up above so you can check out those videos at your pleasure. Something that Cox car purists will see right away is we're using a different third-party driver in the 2C. Now, the reason for that is I just feel that the Cox driver was slightly too large and out of scale. So we'll use him in the 2A, but the 2C is going to get the new driver and a new treatment. On these two cars, we're also going to be using a slightly different paint treatment. Instead of painting the exterior first and then going back and doing the interior, we flip-flopped it. I'm going to try it a little bit differently because the more coats you put on a white finish, you get more and more and more dust. So I'm trying to eliminate the multi-coats of white. We're going to try to spray the interior first, which has its own complications. Okay, here's the way I worked it out in my head. We would make these patterns, use the outer pattern for one purpose, and then use the inner panel for another purpose, all right? So we're going to use the outside one first as a mask for the interior, because it's just a little bit crazy around this windshield. You got to make sure that you get it very accurate. Now, one of the things I'm doing here is being very careful about this front surface where I'm putting the tape down. As I said, the windshield, you got to make sure you have that painted perfectly around where that windshield is. Now, this time on these cars, I took out the little groove that wraps around the windshield because that causes a problem in painting. It just doesn't look very accurate. The big takeaway from painting white cars is that white paint is very unforgiving. So let's do it backwards this time and see how it works out. I'm going to mix these two colors together. These are Tamiya colors, and I mix probably 90% of the dark brown and then about 10% of the red. It tends to look exactly like the Chaparral gel coat. It might be smart to keep the airbrush in your left hand. With your right hand, put the cap back on the paint. If you remember, one of the previous videos I spilled it all over because I didn't put the cap on correctly. Learn from my mistakes, okay? My son Landon is really good with his airbrush. Now me, I tend to put a little too much air pressure in. I like to see a little more paint coming out of there, and I think Landon's a bit more patient than I am, and he gets really good results from it. However, we didn't suffer any drips this particular day out, so I'm very happy about that. Let's start with the white now. Finally, after all this work on this glue bomb to bring it back to health, we're going to start putting those white coats on, and it takes a lot of them. And now a little airbrushing interlude. Now let's introduce a brand new skill. I have two broken steering wheels. Let's try to repair both of them. This one had a broken spoke, and that one was pretty simple. If you see, one of them has been replaced with just a little tiny piece of styrene. This one is a real problem because the outer ring is a little bit disturbed and the inner spoke is broken as well. Let's fix it with brass. I'm using just a solid rod, and I find something that is approximately the size of the steering wheel, and that happens to be this little tap holder. Perfect. Once you've made a coil, then you cut both sides at approximately the same place. Use your needle nose pliers then to get it back into a round form. Cut the other side. Man, you've got something that looks exactly like a steering wheel in the proper dimensions. So let's make sure the ends are touching each other, and then we're just going to quickly solder. But before we do, let's make sure that solder is as clean as we can make it. I'm using some steel wool. Usually 4/0 steel wool is really good for this purpose. I have a cool new tool to show you. It's a 20-volt Hart soldering iron. It's really small and it heats up quickly. You'll see what I'm talking about. Just snap the battery into place, press it on, wait just a few short moments, and we are ready to rumble. I'm using a square block that I use for jewelry making to do soldering. Of course, just use anything. You can even use a plate to solder on. For those that haven't done any work in brass before, just make sure your metals are clean. That's the main thing I can tell you, and then you'll be really satisfied with the outcome. If you don't, it's very difficult to solder. You can't really get a good connection between the metals. Do it right the first time, clean it up, and it'll be perfect, all right? So now I am just going to lay the little center section in. This is all made of styrene. You can see that I have replaced one of the spokes. I'm laying it now just inside the ring, and I will use some cyanoacrylate. They used a few different steering wheels on the Chaparrals throughout the years. The one we're reproducing now had a little bump up in the center like we're showing. I did that just out of a little piece of aluminum. Well, there we go. Good as new. Whenever I'm using my airbrush on small parts, I always try to make sure they are fastened correctly. You can either use one of those third hand tools. I just use a painting stick and a little bit of strong tape to hold these guys into position. This kind of reminds me of that old photograph, these guys having lunch while they were building the Empire State Building. All right, let's put some chrome on those domes. One thing I noticed as I looked really closely at the photographs from the races back in 65, 66, Jim Hall was wearing a silver helmet. I was taken aback by that because I always thought it was a white helmet before. But let's do it correctly now. I'm going to use this tester's paint. But later on, I'm going to decide maybe this is a little too much chrome. What he actually was wearing was something that was kind of a satin finish. And to do that, I'm going to wipe it off a little bit later and then go back with a Tamiya color that really matches it. For the flesh tones, we're going to use Tamiya colors XF55, XF60, and XF2. We're going to put them into these little compartments and mix something that looks like tan skin. I'm figuring that these guys probably had a little bit of a tan going from being out in the weather. We'll follow up then with a photo etch kit, and oh yeah, we're going to try this too. Those are little photo etched bolts. And they are a real trick to put down. You'll see in just a little bit. Now, if you look real closely at these seatbelt buckles, look, they have GM and Mustang logos on them. Since Jim Hall was associated with the Chevrolet team, of course, we're going to put those GM buckles on. Now, this is really going to test my manipulatory skills and 2 or 3 other big words. Now, the real skill needed is trying to figure out how to get these seat belts to stick. What I finally ended up doing was putting a little dab of cyanoacrylate in the back, and then by using an X-Acto blade, just held it into position for a few seconds. That actually seemed to work. Now, as far as the buckle is concerned, I rolled up a little piece of masking tape to hold in place, and with the marvel of 20th century chemistry, it's done. Have you ever heard the old saying, I love hitting myself on the head with a hammer because it feels so good when I stop? That's what we are doing here. These little tiny bolts are ridiculously hard to put into place. First of all, it's difficult to peel them off of the paper. Once they're peeled, you got to find them, and then you put them onto an X-Acto. It took me probably 15 minutes to get these 6 onto the drivers. Now, that said, it adds incredible detail, so well worth the time. Now we're going to go back in with that Tamiya Chrome Silver X11. I gotta say, the more that I use this Tamiya paint, the more impressed I am. Even the metallics are pretty decent. Take a look at that nice sparkly finish. Very, very cool. Now come the decals. Now I'm going to show something that's a little bit abbreviated here about putting these on. Here's the way I'm going to be putting on these decals. Since there was actually a hinge between the door and the lower door panel, I'm going to be splitting these decals right down the center, and you'll see it actually gives the appearance of the one-to-one prototype. I purchased these decals from the same vendor as I did previously when I used the same ones. These were a little bit different. These were a little thinner and much more finicky to use. It was fine on the large decals, but on the small ones, they tended to kind of break up as you were mounting them. Can you feel the energy building? We're in the final details now. I found out that painting these actually looked a little better than the original chrome, so that is silver paint that I used. We needed a base of white underneath this decal, so I simply used a circle template. I just covered up all the unneeded holes with a bunch of masking tape and went to it. Time to install the steering wheels by drilling a hole into the panel, which is the way the original one-to-one prototype was done. Here's a little trick to install the 66 logo on the back. This is an area with mesh. The Chaparral team used a mask to paint this one, and we're going to do the same. Using the leftover decal, we stick it down to paper and then cut out the 66. Well, it's been a long journey getting to the top of Everest, but it's time to plant the flag. It's been too much fun, and it's over too quickly. We have turned 2 glue bombs into 2 gorgeous slot cars. That's one more for the history books. Don't worry, we've got plenty more projects coming up. It's your turn. You gotta sign up and show up.